You know, they say history is written by the victors, but what happens when the victors decide to just leave people out? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on some of history's most powerful and most overlooked queens.
And that really is the central question here, isn't it? Is it possible that some of the biggest turning points in history were actually commanded by women, whose names have been all but lost to time?
Well, we're about to jump across centuries and continents to meet 5 leaders who did exactly that. They stared down empires, they forged their own destinies, and for their trouble, they were almost completely scrubbed from the record.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll meet these hidden rulers. Then, we'll get into their sheer audacity to rule. After that, we'll see how they became masters of strategy. And finally, we'll uncover the shocking war on memory that was waged against them.
Okay, first up, history's hidden rulers. This is where we meet our cast, and trust me, these are women who completely challenge what you think you know about power in the ancient and not-so-ancient world.
And we're talking about some heavy hitters here. We've got Nzinga, a warrior queen in 17th century Africa. Hatshepsut, the pharaoh who literally became a king to rule Egypt. Wu Zetian, the one and only woman to ever rule China in her own right. The legendary Elizabeth I of England. And of course Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. What a lineup, right? Truly global.
So the big question is, how? How did they possibly take the throne in worlds that were built by men, for men? Well, that brings us right to our next section, the audacity to rule. This is all about how they didn't just bend the rules, they shattered them.
Okay, just take Hatshepsut. She was supposed to be a regent, just keeping the throne warm for her young stepson. But she knew the limits for a queen. So, to really lock down her power, she didn't just act like a king, she became one.
And this wasn't just a whim, it was a systematic campaign. She took on all the official titles of a pharaoh. She had artists depict her with the fake beard, a symbol of kingship, and, this is the brilliant part, she commissioned inscriptions declaring she was the divine daughter of the god Amon. I mean, talk about a holy mandate to rule. Who's gonna argue with that?
Now, let's jump forward a few thousand years to another continent. Queen Nzinga is in this high-stakes diplomatic meeting with the Portuguese governor. She walks in and there's no chair for her. The message couldn't have been clearer. They were telling her to sit on the floor beneath him.
Oh, but Nzinga, she wasn't having any of that. In what has to be one of the greatest power moves in history, she just signals to one of her servants who gets on their hands and knees. And Nzinga then sits on the servant's back, meeting the governor at eye level. Not a word spoken, but it just screamed defiance and power. She made it clear who was in charge.
And that's the thing, right? Grabbing power is one thing, but actually holding on to it for decades? That takes a whole other level of genius. So in our next section, let's look at how these women became true masters of strategy.
And what's so cool is how different their playbooks were. You had Elizabeth I, who was a master of spycraft and diplomacy, which helped her take down the Spanish Armada. Then there's Wu Zetian, who used bureaucratic reform to stabilize and grow China. And Hatshepsut? Her tools were trade and massive building projects, which brought an age of incredible prosperity. They each played the game their own way.
What's really fascinating is how Nzinga and Elizabeth on opposite sides of the world used similar, clever tactics against huge empires. Nzinga made an alliance with the Dutch to fight the Portuguese, expertly playing our enemies against each other. At the very same time, Elizabeth was funding privateers, basically government-approved pirates like Francis Drake, to go after Spanish treasure ships. It was a brilliant way to weaken a rival without a full-blown war.
And Wu Zetian's rise, it is just a masterclass in playing the long game. She started as a low-level concubine, worked her way up to empress, took the reins when her husband got sick, pushed her own sons off the throne, and then started her very own dynasty. This wasn't luck, it was a strategic climb that took decades.
And of course, you can't talk strategy without talking about Cleopatra. History loves to frame her story as this big romance, but let's be real here. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were incredibly smart political and military alliances. She used the power of Rome itself to keep her own kingdom safe and independent.
So you might be thinking, if these women were so incredible, so successful, why have I barely heard of some of them? Well, that brings us to our final and maybe most important section, a war on memory. This is about how people actively tried to make the world forget them. Let's go all the way back to Hatshepsut. Her reign was one of peace and wealth. She used that wealth
to build these absolutely stunning temples and giant obelisks. She literally carved her legacy into stone, monuments built to last forever.
And then, after she was gone, a shocking campaign of destruction began. Her own stepson, the man who succeeded her, ordered her statues to be smashed to bits. Her name was chiseled off monuments, her face erased from walls. It was a systematic, deliberate effort to pretend she never existed.
You know, there's actually a name for this: historical erasure. It's when someone is intentionally removed from the historical record, usually for political reasons. In Hatshepsut's case, it was about erasing the dangerous precedent, the very idea that a woman could be a great pharaoh.
Wu Zetian faced a similar war, but it was fought with ink instead of chisels. After she died, Confucian historians, who fundamentally believed a woman should never have that much power, started rewriting her story. They painted her as this evil, ruthless tyrant, completely burying the fact that she'd ruled effectively for decades.
But you know what? Some legacies are just too big to be erased. Elizabeth I ruled for 45 years. 45! It was such a successful period that we still call it the Golden Age. Her impact was just too massive and too immediate for anyone to write her out of the story. So when you step back and look at all 5 of these incredible leaders, from Africa to Asia to Europe, one thing becomes crystal clear. Their stories prove, without a doubt, that the qualities of great leadership, things like strategic brilliance, raw intelligence, and unbelievable courage, they have absolutely no gender. Which leaves us with one last thing to think about, especially when you think of someone like Cleopatra. How many times in history has a powerful woman's actions been dismissed as seduction or charm, when if a man had done the exact same thing, we would have called it what it was: pure strategic genius? It's a question from the past that feels incredibly relevant today.